Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jaw and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Adam and I are big fans of talking about end-to-end encryption and messaging apps, and we've done several shows on that specific topic. So if you haven't heard our shows on it, go back and take a look. We did comparisons and breakdowns of each app and the positives and negatives. We also did an episode recently on Apple's new quantum resistant encryption that they're rolling out by default into iMessage. And so there was some news back in December. iOS 18 released, and one of the biggest features of it was support for RCS messaging, which is Rich Communication Services. And RCS is a messaging platform that was developed by Google. It's been around for a long time, and it's essentially the successor to SMS and MMS, which are text messages that have been around since the beginning of the cell phone. And if you're an iPhone user and you have Android friends or vice versa, I think you're well familiar with the blue bubble of the iMessage to iMessage, and then the green bubble for the SMS protocol or the MMS protocol that has been around. And so, you know, that when you have that, you have character limits. If you try to like a message, it'll send another SMS to say, you know, Adam liked this message, right? And it's really annoying,
Very
of course.
clunky.
And Apple has been using iMessages for a long time. They rolled out end-to-end encryption by default in 2011, and then of course, you know, like I said, they rolled out that quantum resistant encryption by default last year. And RCS is currently on version 2.6, and end-to-end encryption rolled out for the RCS platform on all Android phones by default in 2023. And so now we have two different messaging systems that both have end-to-end encryption. And Apple for a long time did not want to support this, but now it's great. You have the RCS support in iOS 18. You get that tap back reactions. You can reply in a thread, read receipts, high quality images. Your character limit has increased. But the one key thing that is missing is end-to-end encryption. So Apple's platform only supports up to 2.4 RCS for the versioning. And that means that it's pretty much current for all the features with the exception of end-to-end encryption. And so because of that, CISA and the FBI are warning users that the communications between Apple and Android are not secure. Obviously, we know that. They haven't been secure for years. The problem is that the recent breaches by China to our telecommunications companies have stirred up a lot of issues, and now it's becoming a national security problem. And I also kind of find it ironic the FBI is warning people because, you know, they've wanted holes in encryption for a long time. They, you know, using SMS and MMS have been great for them because all that stuff is sent in clear text, stored with the telecommunications companies, and they're great for warrants and wiretapping and all of that. But now, because China has breached our telecommunications companies, it's now a bad thing. So, you know, there's a lot of different options for end-to-end encryption. Signal by far is probably the best third-party one. WhatsApp is also pretty good. That is end-to-end encryption by default. Threema is another one that does cost a little bit of money. That one's probably more for the super paranoid, I would say, because it doesn't reveal any other information other than a username, whereas WhatsApp and Signal have to be associated with a phone number. Telegram does have secret conversations. It is not end-to-end encrypted by default. So that's really important to know. If you're like, Telegram is great, it's not. You have to actually use secret conversations, which is the same thing as Facebook Messenger. There is a way to enable end-to-end encryption, but you have to like go and do it. It's not enabled by default. So therefore, most people won't go and do it. We know that as security professionals, right? So like this warning comes out because end-to-end encryption support for this communication, I mean, it's coming, but it's probably still months, maybe a year away. And in the US, Apple by far has the larger share of the market in terms of phones. The last I checked, Apple has 58, almost 59% of the US market share, whereas Android by far has a larger world market share at almost 71%. So, in general, I think this is coming out for US citizens, making sure that you, or really anyone who's communicating inside the US, because we have more Apple users than Android users. And while this feature is great, it lacks that security. And so, that's why the FBI and CISA are warning.
Yeah, the story about encryption, end-to-end encryption in RCS is a little more nuanced. Functionally, right, there's effectively only two major platforms today. There's Apple and there's Android. And on Android, for the most part, in the United States and in most developed countries outside of China, which is a developed country, but has its own environment for various reasons, most Android implementations are effectively Google's Android implementation with the full complement of the Google Play Store and all of Google Play services included with it, including Google Messages. So the experience of using RCS in real world is that it's end-to-end encrypted because pretty much everyone is using Google Messages, and Google Messages uses a central key server that Google runs, by the way, to do the key exchange. And then carriers also have to have opted in for RCS encryption for it to work. So there's a little bit of nuance here that it's not like any client can do end-to-end encryption. It's effectively only Google's client, although that's the way pretty much everyone experiences RCS except on iOS. And it does require a Google server. So you can understand why there'd be some barriers to entry for Apple to implement this. But at the same time, I think people have a false perception about Apple that like Apple would hold this back to be petty. And I do think, to be fair, Apple absolutely held RCS back to be petty, 100%, because it mostly delivers feature parity from a user perspective with what iMessage does. You have tapbacks, you have reactions, you have read receipts, you have timestamps, you have all of those things. Oh, delivery confirmation that people like about iMessage. So it makes it pretty equivalent. In fact, if you've done an RCS message, even on iOS today, although there's still green bubbles, like you notice all the stuff works now. And so it doesn't feel like you're in a third-class messaging environment now. But you can understand why there will be some barriers to entry to get that end-to-end encryption all the way there. It really needs to be baked into the core RCS standard. And I'll be honest, I'm not up to where that's at as far as if Google is porting back their changes back to the global standard and the state of the art on that. But I don't think I would hold my breath for Apple to go do key exchange with a Google server to enable that, right? It needs to be more agnostic before I'd expect them to move forward. But I think at this point, and to be fair, it was the regulatory environment that forced Apple to adopt RCS. The European Union and a lot of these other, the CMA in the United Kingdom, looking at Apple, are really what forced their hand to implement this, because they were 100% being petty that iMessage is better and you can only do iMessage with Apple devices, go buy an Apple device. I think someone even asked Tim Cook, like at one point, hey, I'm concerned about the lack of this feature, that feature when messaging with my child on Android. How do you propose I solve this? And his answer was, go buy them an iPhone. I mean, they're very naked about it, right? It's iMessage absolutely sells iPhones, and you don't have to go far. Go to X or Twitter and do a search for green bubbles, and you will still get people absolutely saying, I won't date people who have green bubbles. I won't do business with people who have green bubbles. I don't trust anyone who has green bubbles. Like, there is a class warfare thing. And the way to solve that is to buy Apple. And they have embraced and loved being on that side of the coin. So I do think they begrudgingly got pulled here. But now that they're here, Apple and their core of wanting to deliver the strongest security possible would not hold back end-to-end encryption to be petty. They held back features to be petty, absolutely, yes, and to sell more devices. But at this point, the dam's already broken. The cows are already out of the barn. Whatever analogy you want to use, RCS is there, and it's really good implementation on iOS. They need to bring this there. I just think right now it's too Google-centric a solution, and it needs to become more agnostic for Apple to embrace. So we'll see where that goes, but it's a good call out to be aware that it is not end-to-end encrypted by default, and there's really good options that are free and easy to use that are. We use Signal every day. You go to any other country of the world, they all use WhatsApp. So certainly other places have solved for it, and you can too. So just something to be aware of, that is still a risk. And by the way, people asked Apple, why are you still making them green bubbles when they support pretty much all the functionality of the blue bubbles? And their answer was that green bubbles indicate that it's an insecure connection. That was part of like the psychological impact of it, is they do indicate that difference in the security of the messaging platform. So I wonder if and or when RCS gets an encryption on iOS, if we see a change in the colors. So stay tuned for that as well.
Yeah. So this week, and so this episode's not releasing for a couple of weeks, but we're going to talk about what happened in the market. Nvidia lost.
Talk about a freak out.
Yeah, they lost over 1/6 of their value. I mean, it was a few $1 billion, if I understand it correctly.
About $600 billion of market capitalization.
Yeah.
I think I compared it to Delta Airlines is valued at $40 billion. So it was 15 Delta Airlines worth of value, just to give you some sort of comparison into how much it dropped in that one day.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Insane. So, what caused it was this surge in popularity of a Chinese artificial app that kind of spooked investors called DeepSeek. And so this app was reportedly made at a fraction of the cost of its rivals. It launched last week and soared in popularity. It became the most downloaded app in the US. Nvidia and other tech firms connected to AI, including our employer, Microsoft, and Google, saw their values tumble. And, it's been disputed later on because they claimed that it was only made for like $5 million, but that doesn't include the research and the cost of hardware and all this other stuff that like go into that. So I think it costs a lot more. And, of course, any information coming out of the Chinese government is always kind of skewed, and you got to take it with a grain of salt. It's powered by an open source, a DeepSeek v3 model, and the researchers used existing technology as well as open source code so that it can be used and modified and distributed by anyone. Funny that, as soon as the market freaked out, it did adjust, later on in the week, and then people started to dig into the DeepSeek, the more technical folks, and Microsoft is actually investigating DeepSeek's use of OpenAI, the application programming interface, the API, as part of maybe they misused it, right? Because while anyone can sign up and access OpenAI's API, you're not supposed to use that output to train a new AI model. So in the terms and conditions, it says output to develop models that compete with OpenAI, or things where you programmatically extract data or output that cannot be used to train a new model, and it's against the terms of use of the API. So, and there were some other reports, like a reporter tested DeepSeek and asked it about itself, and it claimed it was developed by Microsoft and part of Copilot. So like there's obviously some underlying hallucinations that tie back to OpenAI and some of that data. So, Microsoft's taking a look at it. It's very possible that they might have used other AI models to train it.
Yeah, I mean, so that process you're referring to is called distillation. And it's a way we take existing like flagship models and create derivative models off of them that are faster and more efficient. So if you remember recently, in the last, this is already ancient history with how fast stuff moves. But remember how there was first GPT-4 and then there was GPT-4 Turbo? GPT-4 Turbo was a distillation of GPT-4, and it used GPT-4 to be trained and distilled off of that to create a faster, more efficient model. So it's one of those things that's like drafting and racing, where like you tuck in behind the car in front of you and they break the air for you, and then you can go faster because you don't have to break the wind resistance as you're driving. It's conceptually kind of like that. It's very clever, a lot of the techniques they did. And I just thought the overall reaction was so interesting because it shows you how there's a rush to judgment before you really even understand what's going on. And what's new? It's Wall Street. But it's if you kind of look through like how does this impact different organizations, this announcement. First off, it's not better than one from OpenAI. It's on par with it, but it had to draft off of OpenAI's one model to even get there. So someone still has to blaze the path. Someone still has to break through the wind and create the new thing. And then, yes, you can create derivative distilled models off of them that are faster and more efficient and easier to build and train. But you can't do that if someone's not blazing the path forward. So just to be clear, like, this isn't creating like a better model, it's creating a more efficient model. And so that is certainly interesting because there's finite amount of hardware available. You've heard a lot of people talk about Jevons paradox, and that's the concept of that as something gets more efficient, as opposed to global usage going down, it will actually increase because the efficiency brings it to more scenarios and markets. So the idea is as the cost of like API calls for AI models drops significantly. And Andy, you and I have customers like this. They may be on the sidelines today because building an AI model is too expensive for them. But if it costs a 20th of the cost, there's going to be 30 times more companies getting on board and building stuff, which is more than going to outpace any efficiency gains because more people are going to get in the game. And this happened with like power efficiency in the past. And there's so many examples of real world scenarios where this has happened. So there was this freak out of like, oh, if everything gets less efficient, we'll make less money. Well, first off, no, maybe Nvidia, right? Like I can get Nvidia taking a hit because if you can do more with less. And by the way, and again, Andy and I work for Microsoft. We're in our field security sales. Like we're not involved in building data centers. We're not involved in negotiations with Nvidia. Like I don't know anything about that. Like I just want to be clear. Like I have not negotiated an agreement to buy H100 GPUs to put in a Microsoft data center. I don't do that. Neither does Andy. But if you look, it's pretty clear that our employer included, everyone is trying to disrupt Nvidia. Like no one loves the status quo of we fork out an enormous amount of money to Nvidia every quarter because they're the only game in town, right? Like that's natural that everyone is trying to, Microsoft's building its own silicon. We've built our own several CPUs, GPUs now to run in Azure to run different workloads. And Google has their Tensor and everyone has their own outside of them. So like the idea that they have this impenetrable moat, it kind of seems like it today, but in the technology world, things change fast and someone could hit a breakthrough or figure out a way to deliver like performance. And yeah, then their game is not as strong as it used to be because they can, and rightfully so, capture very strong markups on their devices because they're the best game in town. Like I get it. It's capitalism, baby, but that doesn't last forever. And you question what's next for them when everyone's seeking to disrupt them. I would counter on the other hand, and this is why I never understood the freak out on the tech companies. And so Microsoft and our peers, Google and Meta, models getting cheaper to run are only good for us. Jevons paradox says we're only going to get more customers on board. And I can tell you that will happen. Like it's so intuitively obvious. If Meta's cost of running models goes down, and they were talking about on their earnings call just the other day, how they have like found a like 1,000x efficiency increase in their ability to select ads to serve people. And those ads are like 15x better targeted and 20x more likely to click. Like that's Meta's business, right? They're an advertising company. And if they can serve ads more efficiently, more targeted, and get more clicks on them, like that's a huge revenue generating win for them. In fact, Meta's probably closest to being able to get more revenue from AI very quickly. That's not bad for them. That's good for them, right? Because you can take these learnings from DeepSeek and you can apply them elsewhere. And all anybody's trying to do is just wrestle the efficiency of these models to the ground. So this whole freak out like never made sense to me, Andy. And I know it's a little bit of a tangent here, but I just want to contextualize this for our listeners. Like if you don't follow this as closely, like this is not the sky is falling for Microsoft. This is not the sky is falling for Google. Like this is, hey, that's an awesome innovation. What can we learn from it? And especially to their credit, the DeepSeek folks have been very open about what they did and how they did it and open weights and sharing a lot of what they've done. And so everyone can learn from that and build that into their own systems as well. And again, it's not like this hasn't been done already. They just did it bigger and better. But like GPT-4 Turbo did everything GPT-4 did way faster and more efficiently. So like we've been taking these flagship models, these models that are blazing new frontiers, and then we've been able to make them more efficient with time. And that, of course, that's like technology 101. Of course, that's going to keep happening. By the way, one last interesting note from the Microsoft earnings call. Satya Nadella, our CEO, said on our earnings call here just the other day that we have to be cautious with like how fast we buy GPUs, because we don't want to buy a whole bunch of them that all become inefficient at the same time. Because Moore's law and GPUs, and like everything else in silicon, tends to get that 2x performance increase about every year, every 2 years. You want to build your fleet in a way that you can have that continuous cycle of upgrades and realizing those performance gains over time. So you don't want to just say, Nvidia will take every H100 you can sell, and then all these H100s are completely outclassed a year from now, and we're sitting on a bunch of, not great silicon to do the inferencing and training. That's a problem as well. So, in general, and I know we need to move on, but it's such an interesting story to follow. And I think DeepSeek I can see why everyone's excited about it, but like the idea of like everyone downloaded the app, it was the number one app in the App Store. Why? Like it's on par with OpenAI. It's not better. And so if you're a user and you're just using the free version, like, what do you care? Like, I don't know. I get it was like interest. It's the novelty of it. It's new. Let's kick the tires on it. So like, I get that, but at the same time, like, let's pump the brakes a little bit here. They did not blaze new ground. They took well-tread existing ground and got there more efficiently, which is still notable and worthy of accolades and applause and learnings, by the way, but it is not like a complete shift in the game. And by the way, one last note, and I'll just move on. If you haven't like tried anything that's powered by the O1 model, it'll blow your mind. I'll just give one quick example. I saw a video on Instagram. It was talking about making clarified butter. And they used an interesting technique to make clarified butter where they cooked off all of the water in the butter and then took it off the heat, added water back to it, and put it in the fridge. And then it kind of like the video moved on because, it's like a reel. It was 30 seconds and didn't explain it to the depth I wanted of why does that work? And when I do a web search for this, why does everyone still talk about, well, you got to skim off the milk solids and you got to skim off the foam. And like this guy's like, this is way easier way. So I went and asked Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and we now have a think deeper option, which leverages the O1 model. And I asked it about it. And it gave me an incredibly detailed response explaining exactly why this works and the next steps and what you do, and explained it in great detail. And it was the most unbelievable thing. Like, and I've been working with this stuff a lot. And so I'm a little jaded. And it was like someone who was a Le Cordon Bleu trained professional chef explaining to me exactly the food science of why this method works and why it works so well. And that was just like to have access to that level of knowledge for any query off the top of your head. I know some of this stuff has felt overhyped, and we're having trouble making the connection of like, what's next and how do we get past the hype cycle into making money or enabling something for our company, or everyone afraid this is going to take all our jobs. But at the same time, you still have those moments of absolute just awe at what you're able to do with it. And I had one of those and I thought it was really cool. So wanted to share. Anyhow, I'll get off my big tangent now.
I did have one of those too. As you're talking about that, one of my fun AI stories was I was trying to write an award package for, myself and one other coworker. And I used Copilot and I just asked it. I said, here, I need to write an awards package for me and my coworker. Please take a look at everything we've done from this date to this date, put it into this format and everything. And obviously AI is only as good as what information you put in, but it can use in Microsoft 365 Copilot. Obviously it sees all of our emails and meeting dates, but then if you're recording or at least transcribing Teams meetings, it takes all that as well. Any documents you've shared, and it pulled everything that I did within a time period specifically around, one company for a specific deal and put it into an awards package. And while obviously, again, we stress this all the time, it was not perfect, but it gave me 80% of what I needed. And then we fine tuned it from there. Mm-hmm. And it was just amazing that it could just pull once of, and correlate emails and communications, Teams messages, transcribed meetings, all that stuff, and put it into one awards package. And I was blown away. It took me 5 minutes to do that. And then another, however many days to fine tune it to 20%, but it gave me a great start. So, that's from a working perspective. You obviously were doing some cooking, but either way, I can really revolutionize like the way that you're working.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good story to exemplify being grounded in that kind of workplace data you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that requires changes to the way we work or go about it, where I think it was pretty rare to record or transcribe a meeting before that, unless it was a big public meeting, but you have to get in that habit to build kind of that record to then use and inference against, to get that output. But if you get in that habit and you build that muscle, then it creates an extensive record of what you've done, which is really nice, because sometimes it feels like we show up to work and, you talk into a screen and nothing comes of it. And so it's nice to kind of see all that work effort captured and then put to paper effectively, or digital paper in that case, but still very cool.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking about the chips in Nvidia, and our U.S. strategy, the government strategy to try to wall off China from getting AI technology. China has been behind in this whole AI race from the beginning, because we as a government, the U.S., have tried extensively to prevent them from getting these Nvidia chips. The Biden administration released an executive order, and there have been other times that we've tried. There's an embargo on the exports of the H100 chips that you mentioned several times, Adam. That's the more powerful chips that have been used to run these AI models. However, there have been some folks in China who stockpiled some H100 chips before the embargo went into place. They also have the older H800 chips, which are still, Nvidia is still allowed to sell to China. And so they've just basically done more with less. And that's also kind of the marvel of this whole thing, is how they've come out with this model with the less powerful chips. And our strategy, in my opinion, as a government, has never been an effective one, because we are a global market, and like, people are innovative, and they will always come up with a way to do something even if you're trying to prevent them from doing it. Plus,
necessity is the mother of all invention, right?
Yeah, and they also
look at who's like considered some of the greatest programmers of all time. It's all the programmers from the 70s and 80s who had to like write code with 64 kilobytes of RAM. Like, or whatever, they had such strong constraints. They had to think up such clever solutions to do it. They're brilliant. And today, I'm not picking on software developers, because you just have more resources than you need. You have plenty of CPU, plenty of memory, so it's different. But here again, like, they had this set of restrictions they had to work around, and by all accounts, they were on the up and up. They didn't use any chips they weren't supposed to. They followed all the rules, and they were super clever and innovative. And that's, again, like, as a technologist, how can I be mad about that? That's awesome. Like, good for you for finding a way to work within the constraints you had. And constraints almost always lead to better invention in many ways.
Yeah, and I think the only like question is the use of other AI models, maybe against the terms of use to train their model, right?
Right.
So like, all of these OpenAI and even Meta have these open source APIs that they've published, and so obviously folks in China are going to get their hands on them if they can, and so that's really the only question. But
yeah, right.
So let's talk about like.
Well, one last comment on that before you move on. And I'm not going to say I have the answers here, right? Because you talked about like our AI policy and appearing to be ineffective. And I've seen a lot of debate on this. And they have not even been able to follow the flurry of executive orders coming out of the Trump administration. So I don't know if this has been completely pulled back. It felt like almost everything was. I know there's going to be a different approach to how we manage AI moving forward. I'm open to that, because I think it's clear maybe we didn't have all the answers the first time around. I don't know what those answers are. I don't know how you acknowledge you exist in a global market. And then you also create a healthy way, again, for American companies to help other American companies succeed, right? So there's nuance there, and I don't know the answer to it, but I think it's okay to acknowledge at this point that maybe some of our strategies we put in place are not the most effective, and we should reconsider our approach. The other thing I just want to acknowledge, and also not say of any of the answers to, and you touched on at the very end, you talked about how DeepSeek has been accused of scraping the APIs of OpenAI, as an example, which up until this point, until Stargate is done, still runs exclusively on Microsoft infrastructure. There's this argument that, well, OpenAI and all these other models, they scrape the entire web, so it's hypocritical of them to say, well, we could scrape everything, but you can't scrape us. But first off, it's a derivative work. right? So if I write a book report or a report on anything, and I go do a lot of research and use a lot of different sources to pull that together, and then you basically crib all of my notes from that to make yours, that's different because you're using my effort to already derive information from a broader information source. So I see that as not the same thing. Probably not a great practice to go scrape someone else's API. And they are allowed to set their terms of service. And if you don't agree with the terms of service, then don't do that. So that is a thing too, but I will acknowledge a little bit of why some people feel there's hypocrisy there, in the sense that many of these models were trained on broad corpuses of information across the internet, and there remain ongoing litigation today between people who make content like newspapers and magazines and people like OpenAI, and even maybe our parent company, Microsoft. I don't know how much we've been pulled into it, but I just want to acknowledge that, but also say, like, I don't have the answers on that, but I can acknowledge why some people feel like it's hypocritical to feel like it's okay for you to do it, but then it's not okay for somebody to come and do it to you. But I would argue again, it's already a derived work at that point, so it's a wholly different work. But anyhow,
so let's end the show and talk about a little bit of the privacy stuff. As security professionals, we want to take a look at the security and privacy of these applications. And so when I use AI products, obviously I know that they're deriving information from my things. So when I use Copilot, I know that all of my searches, even in personal life, Microsoft is looking at the websites that I'm going to, the searches that I'm conducting, and then that information goes in and helps train the model. Same thing on the Microsoft 365 side, except it's all contained within your organization tenant. I actually went in and turned off Apple Intelligence recently on my phone, even though it's a pretty cool feature, but Apple is using our data on their phones and how we use it in order to train their AI models to become better. And so, if you don't want to do that, you can opt out of it. It is turned on by default, but it's a little bit different. And it's the same way with every other, like Twitter has their own model, Facebook has their own, Meta has their own model, Google has their own model, and they're all using our data to train it. And for the most part, I get that. And, when it's contained in the United States, it's a little bit more palatable. DeepSeek is a little bit more aggressive with the way that they do it. And, just as a tangent, I think a lot of users in America, people in America, are willing to trade security for convenience a lot more often than I think I'm okay with. And a good example of that, just as a small tangent, is recently the TikTok ban. So TikTok went offline, and just within that short period of time, Red Note became this like the most downloaded app on the app stores, which is like a TikTok like app, but very much Chinese. Like it's doesn't even hide the fact that it's Chinese. And I just find
it literally has like kanji Chinese characters like on the app icon, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so I find it kind of interesting, like the TikTok ban in general that went in the bill that actually banned TikTok, and TikTok was trying to follow that in that short outage period. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, like 354 to 65 in the House and 79 to 18 in the Senate. And so there was a reason why TikTok was banned, due to national security reasons. These folks in Congress have top secret information on national security threats. And I think they've just been really bad at communicating that message to the American public on why China is such a threat. And we know as security professionals, like China is an adversary. They believe they are at war with the United States. And it's evident that we get attacked from them all the time. They steal IP all the time. And so, I find it interesting that even though we talk about security, the large swath of public users, the American public, really almost don't care that their information is being siphoned by the Chinese government.
It was, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it really was eye-opening to me to watch the reaction when TikTok went offline. Because to your point, those numbers, again, I'm going to repeat them: 354 to 65 in the House, 79 to 18 in the Senate.
You don't see that.
You don't, in today's like hyper partisan United States of America, you don't see that. Nothing passes like that. And so that indicates there is obviously something that has them concerned. And by the way, two presidents, both of whom I think you could fairly say are quite different politically between Biden and Trump. Trump first brought up banning TikTok. Biden signed the law to ban TikTok, and both supported it. So it has not been a political thing, and somehow it became a political thing right as we had the transition, thankfully peaceful transition of power here in the United States, with the inauguration on January 20th, where the Biden administration kind of passed the ball to the Trump administration to deal with it. And then Trump came back and signed an executive order delaying the enforcement of that law for 75 days. And it became like a political win. And it's just so bizarre of like, this is totally bipartisan. It's been supported by both sides. Like, this wasn't the government's taking away my stuff. It was, this is a risk to our country, and we're trying to protect our country and its people. But that has been communicated so poorly. And I'll be the first to admit, like, I like TikTok. It's engaging and it's entertaining, and there's a lot of people on there I like. But I'm acutely aware of like, what is the deal that they're so wound up about? What am I missing? What am I not seeing here? And I try to put on my security professional hat and like really be hyper vigilant about like, what is it about? Is it the algorithm? Is it steering me towards content that would sow distrust in the United States or in the political process, or what are they concerned about? And so I like to look at it through that lens too. But it was just an incredible thing. And you're right, Andy, like, people are unmoved by that. They're unmoved by this app could be scraping a bunch of stuff. It could be storing it all in China. They could be building a profile on you, blah, 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 blah. People are like, I don't care. I want to watch my funny videos on TikTok or follow my person I like on there. Give me back my stuff. And to the point where they're going to go download another app, even more like on the nose, with affiliation to China, literally red icon, red in the name, Chinese characters on the app logo. And just like, I don't care. And so that goes back to, as we talk about DeepSeek and some of their privacy principles and how they operate, why maybe it catapulted to being the number one app in the App Store so fast, is because of that overall kind of malaise and just not being checked into or caring about this, where it goes all the way back to the rise of the internet and people preferring free ad-supported sources over paid sources, right? Like, I always marveled when the App Store first came out. And it's like, software development's hard. If people write software that is valuable to you, pay them for it. No, I don't pay for apps. Like, I meet people with like, I don't pay for apps. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, in every other aspect of your life, if someone delivers value to you, you're willing to pay for it. Why is software something you're not willing to pay for? I mean, of course, I guess I'm weird. I pay for news. I subscribe to my local newspaper because I want to support journalism. Like, I buy apps, I pay for news, I pay for lots of things that people only want free and ad supported on. So I think that's just Andy, to your point where you said I'm more conscious of this stuff. I mean, that's where you and I, maybe why we do the show. Yeah. Because we do zig a little bit where everybody else zags.
Yeah. If you look at their, going back to DeepSeek, if you look at their privacy policy, you'll see a lot of the normal things, right? Like date of birth when you're setting up an account, username, email, address, phone number, even your password. So it'll collect all that information, the device you're using, OS that you're running, IP addresses, system language, general diagnostic information. Third parties can share information that they've collected with you with DeepSeek, and they also employ cookies to track your activity, but you can disable that. So that's pretty standard for a lot of stuff. I'm sure, like Instagram, Facebook, that they'll do all that stuff. Maybe not your password. I don't know. But from there, it's also important to know that DeepSeek is collecting everything you do. So all your text inputs, audio inputs, prompts, files, feedback, any other way that you interact with the model is saved. Again, also not unique to when you're using AI, but you definitely shouldn't share any confidential or private information. So like the people who ask like AI models about their medical symptoms or diseases, that is to me crazy, because you're essentially sharing HIPAA information to an AI model, or you shouldn't ask it about anything that could be tracked back to you, or things that pertain to you personally. Some of these things definitely, again, are not great data points, but when you're dealing with AI, not out of the norm. From there, DeepSeek will also collect any text that you send to its model. It tracks your keystroke patterns as well as rhythms. So that means anytime that you're interacting with your keyboard while using DeepSeek, it's analyzing both what you type and how you type it. So essentially a key logger. It is literally a key logger. And of course, like the way that it stores data is concerning. Per the privacy model, it stores all the information in servers in China, which is also part of the reasoning behind why we're trying to ban TikTok, because all of our data is stored in Chinese servers. And there's no time limit on how DeepSeek keeps your data other than as long as necessary. Like the way that other companies handle it, like Meta has that same clause, but companies like OpenAI and Google, they have time limits. Like things are deleted after a certain period of time after it's trained the model or whatever it is. So a lot of concerns here. As a security professional, as someone who is generally pretty leery of anything coming out of the Chinese government from a technology standpoint, I would steer clear from this. This is not something I would use ever.
When you walk through the example, you gave one of the examples about providing personal health information to the model to ask questions. Hey, I've got this weird rash. What's going on? And then people always kind of raise these, and they almost sound like tinfoil hat arguments that, well, what if your health insurance company starts buying that information from them? Well, there's got to be a reason they can't do that. Well, just provide a real world example of a thing that actually happened. General Motors cars, obviously most modern cars today, they all have a telemetry in them. They capture a ton of telemetry, how fast you accelerate, how hard you brake, how many times you did this, how many times you did that, a lot of information on your driving habits. And you sign all this away probably when you're sitting in the dealership, like in their, you're waiting for the porters to bring the car around when you just bought the car. And they're like, oh, download this app on your phone and sign up here and tap accept. And you don't get a chance to read any of it. It turns out that when you sign up for like OnStar or something through Chevy or other GM brands, you were giving them permission to sell your driving habit information to other parties. Well, that got sold to data aggregators, which then in turn sold it to car insurance companies. So there is a real world story. This is not made up, where someone got their renewal notice from their automobile insurance that it had tripled in cost. And the rationale was your driving habits we observed through telemetry captured off your car. And this person had no clue that was happening, that they had opted into that they had approved that or anything else. And there was really no, the opt-in was you want to use your car, like you want to use the connected capabilities in it. Well, now you've opted in and agreed to all this stuff. They will find a way, right? They want to know everything they can about you. They run your credit, they do all sorts of things. Like they're building a risk model. And I understand they want to capture everything they're legally entitled to capture. But it is not a stretch to imagine them wanting to know if you have underlying health condition that maybe you don't even know about, but the AI model has figured out you have because you keep asking questions about this, that, and this. And they can, buy that information and raise your rates before you start issuing a bunch of claims against really expensive treatments. That is not crazy to think about. And you can come back at me and say, well, this law protects this and this law protects that. And that's maybe all true. It's certainly reasonable to expect that over the next 4 years in the United States, a lot of regulation that had protected consumers in the past will be peeled back. That certainly seems to be the MO of the current administration. Any of those protections that did exist, it's hard to count on them all existing in the future. And so that's where you have to be very wary of where and how you share your information and how they use it, and why it's more important than ever to concern yourself with the privacy policy, the data handling policy of these organizations. And yes, they don't make it easy to read. Yes, it's written in legalese, but generally there are good Samaritans out there on the internet who will alert you to, like, this place has an atrocious privacy policy and here's what they do or could do and why. And that's your chance to jump off the sinking ship, hopefully before it's too late. But it's a good thing to pay attention to. And I think we all, as we are in a more digital world, and I'm preaching to the choir here with our listeners, our listener base, I am confident, pays a lot of attention to this stuff. But this is where we can have those organic conversations with our friends and family and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be using this, or maybe you should try to use that instead. Or, hey, instead of messaging you through my iPhone, can we use a WhatsApp or a Signal to talk? Because right now, the way we talk, the messages can be intercepted in transmission. These are all conversations we can have and help share with the people around us and help keep them safe. Even if they don't take a personal interest in it, we can help them maybe take more interest in it.
Yeah, it's funny that you end with that, Adam, because I was getting work on my tattoo, and my tattoo artist knows that I'm in information security, and she asked me just like, what do you think about Red Note? And I was like, oh man, I don't think it's good. Like, you shouldn't have it. And she's like, oh, really? She's like, oh man, I really liked watching, because like apparently she was watching Chinese people like walk around their house and like do house tours or like apartment tours in China.
That'd be really interesting. Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah, and she thought it was really cool, but then she's like, yeah, I'll delete the app. Like I was just lurking.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I don't think it's good. So, you can have an impact. Like, she deleted her app and her account.
Mhm.
So
We tend to be trusted advisors in our communities, in our circles.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was a fun conversation, a little bit
Yeah, it
different.
was.
Hopefully everyone learned a little something. This is our show for this week. The notes or the links for all the topics that we talked about will be in the show notes, as well as our contact information. You can reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or topics you want to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.